Good morning. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm a partner with Kenny and Sams. Joining me is my colleague Hurley Romero. We're here to talk to you this morning as part of the ongoing Kenny and Sam's construction risk series. Every the third Thursday of every month at 7:30 in the morning, we're here to tell you our thoughts as construction practitioners on different construction concepts. So this is an opportunity to go over, in this particular series, different types of contract types. For those of you that have been in the construction field for some time, some of these concepts are going to be well known and fairly elementary. But if you're breaking into construction, if you're transitioning from being a tradesperson, starting up your own small business, this will be helpful for you to understand some of the basic construction contract types and some of the statutes that inform and in fact require the type of construction contract you may have to use depending on the type of project. So our clients range from project owners, including larger commercial owners, homeowners, to general contractors and subcontractors. So we're working on contracts from the perspective of both owner, GC, and sub. And so we're going to take a look at some of the pros and cons of the different types of contracts. You may think that all contracts are created equal, or a contract is essentially a contract. Contract and construction is going to give an overview of the scope of the work. It's a really important part of what you do as a contractor is to identify the scope with specificity. As attorneys, we're not weighing in on scope, but we can tell you that there are a lot of disputes about scope, and so that's really critical. But a contract doesn't just include the scope, the price, and signing on the dotted line. I mean, that is the basic part of a construction contract. But the type of project that you're endeavoring on, whether you're the owner, whether you're the GC, or whether the subcontractor, is going to uh, inform and drive the type of contract you should select. So we're going to go over some of the high level concepts, the types of contracts for those of you that are new to the construction contract world, and go over some of the pros and cons for the different type of contract. The right contract that you ultimately select, it's critical to make sure that you make a profit as the contractor, that the owner's satisfied, and that the parties are on the same page. Because as much as we like to litigate at Kenny and Sam's and we're ready to jump in to fight, the amount of risk management that you can put into contract negotiation and making sure that your understanding of what the project consists of, your understanding of the scope lines up with the other party involved, that's going to save all parties the time, the expense, and the drama that comes with being part of a big litigation. So what we've done is try to reverse engineer what we see in the litigation end of things to try and inform how we would negotiate contracts and give you that experience so that you can figure out what you're looking for, what you're trying to get out of a project. And the more agreement there is up front and the good faith effort to negotiate a meaningful contract so that everyone's on the same page, the less likely it is to end up in litigation down the road. Hurling's going to talk right now about one of the most basic types of contracts, a fixed price or a lump sum contract. Hurling?
Yeah, thank you, Nate. And really, with all contracts, I think the devil's in the details. Fixed price is pretty simple when you look at the bigger picture of what it is, and it's basically I'm going to perform this project at this price for this set scope. So for relatively simple projects that have a predictable outcome, predictable scope, maybe a few discrete issues that you're resolving or addressing, it's a simple way for the contractor to say, hey, this is how much it's going to cost me, for the owner to see, hey, this is how much the project cost is going to be and what you're going to perform. Now, the issues come into play here where the scope is a little unclear. So maybe there's a term included in the scope, such as a finished bathroom, and the owner has one definition or perspective or understanding of what a finished bathroom is going to look like, whereas the contractor has an alternative perspective on what that means. And once the build out is complete and the owner sees a finished bathroom without paint, and the contractor says, well, it's ready to paint, that's what we understand is finished, that's where the parties begin to butt heads. So it's important when you're doing a fixed price contract to make sure, both for the contractor and the owner's benefit, that the scope is clear and laid out. If you're an owner, make sure you ask questions up front, because once you sign, it's going to be a bit difficult to argue later on that a certain portion of the work was actually part of the fixed price initial contract. So if you have questions on what certain terms mean, don't be afraid to ask, because ultimately that's what you're paying for. So those are the important things to keep in mind. But again, fixed price on a high level is just you're performing this work for this total cost.
Yeah, so fixed price is going to be ideal for more streamlined, straightforward projects. It also, when you're able to give a fixed price, it allows the customer, I think, better opportunity to select the contractor in that they can bid out the scope using schematics or plans that should set forth what they're looking to have built. Contractor comes in and is able to give a price, and it's a price certain based on what that scope looks like. And so, from the homeowner's perspective or a customer's perspective, it's just easier to wrap their head around what that's going to look like. It also allows less supervision and oversight on the part of the owner. They know that they're getting a specific outcome for a certain amount. As compared to some of the other types of contracts that we'll discuss in a bit, the owner doesn't have to be quite as involved. It just knows at the end for a price certain what the project should look like. That then allows the contractor some more flexibility, right? You're going to bid on a project, you're going to give a fixed price. Then within the project, opportunities for savings on materials and labor and supplies exist such that if the contractor gets the work done and gets it done for the scope that it agreed to, then within that there's opportunities to have cost savings. It's not an ideal fit for more complicated projects. You need to have the plans well defined, right? You can't have a fixed price when you have a moving target on what the scope is going to look like. And so for more simple projects, more straightforward projects where the scope is very well defined, you know what the plans are, then it's more appropriate. Where it's fixed price, there's risk on the for the contractor if the estimating isn't there. So it's so critical that you have a good understanding of the cost of materials, of the cost of labor, because if ultimately those costs exceed your profit margin for a fixed price contract, that risk is on the contractor. So you need to be very certain with regards to schedule, with regard to material costs, labor costs, and have a good sense of what those are going to look like as you project out through the life of the project. We'll talk a bit about different clauses that you want to work into fixed price contracts and contracts generally, but with material escalation costs, those pose a particular significant risk when you're dealing with fixed price, where if those costs go up and there's not a clause in the agreement, then the risk is really on the contractor, and that's where the exposure is. So you can have those increased escalation costs just eat completely into your profit. One of the things you need to keep in mind with fixed price contract is in conjunction with statute chapter 142A, which is the home improvement contractor statute. That has to do with residential renovation, not new construction, but renovation projects in the Commonwealth. Those require fixed price contracts, and Hurling will speak now just about 142A.
Yeah, so that applies, as Nate said, to renovation of owner-occupied 1 to 4 family homes. The statute does explicitly exclude certain contractors from the purview of 142A, which means if you are either an architect, electrician, or plumber, you're excluded as a matter of law, so you don't have to worry about that. There's other aspects related to the work that's being performed. So, for instance, if you exclusively provide driveway installation or maintenance services, if you exclusively provide installation of HVAC systems, and other categories of work, then you're excluded from 142A. But the important and operative term there is exclusively. So if you're a contractor that does some driveway work, but you're also performing additional renovation work inside the home, for instance, a new partition in a part of the home to separate rooms, things like that, then your work actually might fall within the purview of 142A, even though you were also performing one of the scopes of work that is excluded from 142A. So it's really important to understand that, review the scope of work, and consider whether it falls under 142A or if it falls under one of the exclusions. Because if it does fall under 142A, there is a lot of strict requirements that you have to adhere to, or you can face the consequences in terms of damages and potential treble damages under Chapter 93A, which is one of the favorite litigation practices here in Massachusetts. So I'm sure the contractors here are aware of 93A and the potential implications. It also allows for attorney's fees, costs, and like I said, up to treble damages or triple damages. So it's really something important that you have to pay attention to at the outset of the project, so you're not caught off guard at the end if something goes wrong.
Yeah, if you're doing renovation work for a owner-occupied property in Massachusetts, you've got to be very mindful of 142A and the contractual requirements that that statute requires. If you have any questions, you want to consult with an attorney. But as Hurling pointed out, there are some situations that are just removed from 142A clearly, but the more dangerous ones are where you're doing some work that might fall outside of 142A, but some amount of the construction that you're asked to do by the homeowner brings you within the purview of 142A. Then you have to have a fixed price contract, and it has to comply with the statute, right? And there are really strict requirements. So we've done presentations on 142A. There's information on our website that you can get about 142A. The important thing is if you're doing that residential renovation work, be aware that the statute requires a fixed price contract with certain key terms. There's other types of project delivery methods, alternative delivery methods to a fixed price or a lump sum contract that are appropriate for different types of jobs, whether it's the amount of the job, the state of where the plans are, the scope of work when you begin the project, and just depending on where you're at in terms of the trade, there might be projects that are appropriate to start the demolition phase of the project, but they may not have a fully defined scope for what the entire project is going to consist of. And so in those situations, the different project delivery methods for GCs and subs and owners may change depending on that. So you want to really be thinking creatively about what type of alternative delivery method is appropriate to help ensure the satisfaction of the owner, profit for the contractor, fairness, and just making sure people are on the same page. But we'll give an overview of some of those alternative delivery methods. One is cost plus, and in its most basic sense, it's exactly that. There's costs and then there's plus, the plus being the fee. But in a cost plus contract, contractors are paid for all of their construction related expenses. So things like your overhead, labor, materials, supplies, and overhead like insurance or mileage or even portions of your office rent. Those expenses, that overhead, can be included as part of the cost in a cost plus contract. And then, of course, there's the plus, which would be the contractor's fee that's on top of those expenses, those costs. That's a negotiated percentage. Industry standard for homeowner work or renovation work, new construction, you're in the range of 15, 20%, sometimes 10%. We've had clients that have gone with a lower percentage as part of starting out and trying to build up their portfolio. They'll agree to a 10% to get the job. Savings is, of course, passed on to the owner, but it gives a newer contractor the opportunity to get their foot in the door. The pros of a cost plus arrangement, you've got guaranteed profit, right? You know you're going to get a percentage on top of what the costs are. So you will get that profit built on top of what the overhead and expenses look like. The contractor is paid in full for the construction costs. That's another plus to the contractor. So you shift the risk of losing money on materials away, and you're going to get paid for those materials. It is useful, as we were talking about, when the scope is unclear or less fully developed. That's an appropriate contract so that you can jump in, start the work based on the cost, get a fee paid on top of it, and the scope and design can continue to evolve or change or be finalized while the work is starting. It also allows quality to be a bit more of a priority, and you can focus on what the customer wants, giving the materials that they're requested at the highest level, and guaranteeing you'll get paid on top of it. The downside, I'd say, in cost plus in some of these alternative delivery methods is the effort that has to go into keeping track of all of the invoices, expenses, and paperwork associated with it. Because with cost plus, you're going to be opening the books and showing it to the customer or an owner's rep. So they're going to have an opportunity to look at those line items with the backup behind it. So with fixed price, well, you'll be in a position to say, look, this is the bottom line. This is what we agreed to. There's no reason to open up the books and turn over the backup documents to a customer. With Cost Plus, they're looking at these documents on a regular basis as part of payment apps that are being submitted. They want to see the backup documents. So you're going to have to keep very detailed records. You're going to have to show them to the owner, and some include a not to exceed price. So again, there is risk there, and while estimating is always important, with Cost Plus, there's a little bit more flexibility, but you're still going to have a sense of where this thing is going. You know, a similar type of alternative delivery method with some differences is guaranteed maximum price. A GMP, and some of these types of contracts can overlap and be more than one type here, but at a fundamental level, a GMP, it has a cap to the total amount. So while there is that flexibility within the contract price, it's only up to a certain amount before the contractor then bears the risk of going over that amount. So the pros for a GMP, like a Cost Plus, it includes cost for labor, materials, and overhead, and then a percentage on top of those to help generate the profit, but only up to a point. The one of the benefits, it can be to the owner, and in fact owner and contractor, depending on how the contract is negotiated, but there can be a savings clause such that if a contractor comes in underneath the GMP, those savings can be returned to the owner. So that certainly is an incentive and appealing to an owner negotiating that type of a contract. Or it can be negotiated where there's a shared savings clause. So both owner and contractor are incentivized to bring it in under the GMP. And when that's done, the contract would speak to how the savings are allocated. The it can help also expedite the lending process, depending on who's doing the borrowing, but that's a part of it as well. So cons, I think, for a GMP contract to be aware of, it like a Cost Plus, it really requires a careful papering and documentation of expenses. So you're again going to have to share those documents. That can be time consuming, particularly on larger multi-phase projects. So just be aware when you're going in that direction, the amount of sort of office work you're going to be responsible for when it comes to documenting and producing the backup for the different expenses. That can be time consuming, and again, the contractor bears the risk if that GMP is reached. So once it gets to that amount, like a fixed price, if it goes over, absent change orders or agreed upon revisions to scope, that risk is really with the contractor. And then if the original estimate ends up being below the final costs, contractor can end up losing money. So that's another type of contract to be aware of. Time and materials, again, these are all sort of overlapping, but a T&M contract, owner pays an agreed upon price that's based on the time spent, based on the materials and the profit. Like a fixed price contract, a T&M contract is straightforward. It's more appropriate for smaller jobs that don't that aren't covered by 142A, but enables you to come in there, give a relatively straightforward price to the owner. The owner can kind of wrap their head around what's going on and how they're getting billed. It helps the owner budget for costs. It reduces the contractor's risk because the contractor is simply passing on the costs of materials and its time. And it protects the contractor in particular from fluctuating material costs. Because of course, as those materials come in and go up, you're turning them over to the owner to be paid for. Similarly, there's the benefit to the owner if materials are going down, although we've not seen that significantly, at least from sort of pre-pandemic prices. Things have leveled off a bit, but there's pros and cons to having materials passed along directly to the owner. But the contractor knows it's going to get profit. It's going to get paid on top of the materials used in an amount, a dollar amount, typically by the hour, that's pre-negotiated. Cons, there's less transparency for the owner. Where you don't establish a price and parameters up front, but are passing along costs on a regular basis to the owner. As you can appreciate, that can cause sticker shock to owners. And so where a price isn't negotiated or a guaranteed maximum price isn't established, for smaller jobs, that can work out fine. If they get big and prices get out of control, you may suddenly have owners having a different memory of what they wanted from the beginning, and that's where you can have disputes. And inaccurate estimates will, like all jobs, will lead into profit, but it's particularly something to consider with a T&M project. And so that's an overview of sort of the general types of construction contracts that you want to be thinking about, whether you're coming at it from the owner side or whether you're coming at it from the contractor side. We also wanted to share some key contract provisions that we are always negotiating into contracts that we're flagging for our clients if the language isn't favorable or if it's just really one-sided. And so there's different ways to flesh out these provisions, but there's a couple of key contract provisions that we want owners thinking about, we want contractors thinking about. Harling's going to speak to some of those now.
Sure. So we'll start with the waiver of subrogation. So this one's related to your insurer's ability to recover part of its paid out funds from another responsible party. So, for instance, let's say you make a claim to your insurer, they pay out for whatever it may be, a personal injury or property damage claim, but you were only 60% at fault and some other party is 40% at fault. Now, the insurer typically would want to go after that other party for that 40%, their corresponding responsibility in the underlying claim. If you've waived your right to subrogation, your insurer can no longer go after that additional portion that the other party is responsible for. Why this is important is not only does it restrict your insurer's rights and abilities to recover that amount, it also could potentially violate your insurance policy. So an important aspect to this is if you do see a waiver of subrogation provision in the contract, make sure you're sharing that either with your attorney or your insurance agent or both to make sure that it's something that you can sign if you're okay with signing it under your insurance policy, because you don't want to be in violation of the insurance policy by signing a contract with that provision. The next one I want to talk about is waiver of consequential damages. This one's really important, as all the ones that we're talking about here, but I think this one particularly is relevant for litigation. And so consequential damages, broadly speaking, just means damages that are an indirect result of a breach of contract. And so that's broad, vague, mercurial even, and I think it's intentionally so because it's very fact specific, right? So, for instance, if you're an owner that's contracting someone to build out a stadium for a sports team, let's say the New England Revolution finally builds a stadium in Boston, and they have anticipated ticket sales. They want to open in January 2022. Now it's January 2023. They missed out on a whole season of ticket prices. They could potentially come after the contractor if the contractor is responsible for the delays for the lost ticket sales. That lost profit model is the quintessential definition of what consequential damages are. It's not exclusively what they are, but it's an illustrative example. And so if the owner had waived its right to consequential damages, they can no longer come after the contractor for those lost ticket sales. And there's several examples of what a consequential damage could be. For instance, lost business opportunities. So if you're a contractor and the delay is actually the fault of the owner or the architect, and you had another project scheduled after the completion of this one, but the project was delayed, now you're losing out on that subsequent business opportunity. That could potentially be a consequential damages claim. If you've waived your consequential damages rights, then you can no longer make a claim for that lost business opportunity. So they're very important, very fact specific, but you have to keep in mind the rights that you're essentially giving up if you're waiving your rights to consequential damages.
So a couple points to make about both waiver of subrogation and waiver of consequential damages and those provisions in a contract. They can be one-sided or they can be mutual. So with waiver of subrogation, both sides may want the finality of knowing that if their insurance is involved and their insurance pays for claims, that it ends there. That is, that their insurance doesn't then go chase the other party or another party to try and get itself paid back for the claims that it paid out. As Harling mentioned, you do want to make sure that there aren't provisions in your CGL policy, your insurance policies that prohibit waivers of subrogation flowing to you. But any chance you can get the other side to agree to a waiver of subrogation and it's not precluded by your insurance policy, that gives you finality. It gives you the ability to know that a dispute where insurance was involved is over with. and you're not going to get dragged back into some sort of litigation in a battle of insurance companies. Similarly with waiver of consequential damages, Hurling gave a good overview of what a consequential damage is: lost profits, lost business opportunities, and a lot of other things that may not be anticipated and you're not thinking about when you're entering into an agreement. That's to be um, contrasted with direct damages. So you can appreciate if you do a bad job and it causes the work to need to be redone, or injury or property damage to a project. Those are direct damages. The consequential damages are when things are delayed, and as Hurling mentioned, all of these unexpected costs that can really greatly exceed the price of a contract. So again, these waivers to certain types of damages and waivers for subrogation are about finality and about limiting your exposure. One of the other contractual provisions that you want to see in a contract, and we push for on contracts, are limitation of liability. So you can imagine you enter into a relatively small value contract. You don't want a $25,000 or a $50,000 contract to expose you as a contractor to millions of dollars in damages. So it's oftentimes appropriate, and the parties will agree to a limitation of liability. The language in the limitation of liability, so that it's balanced and that both parties can agree to it, can be capped at the amount of the project, right? So the exposure is more in line with the value of the project and the upside to a contractor. That's the logic behind it. Additionally, you can also have language in there that limits the liability to available insurance. And so oftentimes we'll push back saying, it's okay if a claim at least is exceeding the amount of the project, provided, however, that claim only goes to the available insurance. And so that gives protection to a contractor that its exposure is limited to what its insurance carrier would pay and no more. Owners don't always agree to those clauses, but we certainly want to see them in contracts, and you should have discussions with counsel about whether they're available in a particular contract. We could do an entire presentation, I think have done presentations on indemnification language, but that's a really important part of the contract. And not all indemnification clauses are created equal. In fact, the range of indemnification language is really significant. You don't want to be indemnifying essentially someone else for things that are not in your control. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. To the extent that there are things that are within your control and you can mitigate the risk and it's covered by insurance, that's where we're trying to go with indemnification. But when you see an indemnification clause in an agreement, don't try to understand it. Don't try to negotiate it. That really is the kind of thing that you need counsel to jump in on, but you certainly need to be aware of those clauses in contracts. And no damages for delay clauses are very significant. Owners are going to try to say there's no delay damages, whether it's in terms of money or even time. Of course, the contractor wants the maximum flexibility under the contract to be able to seek damages if the owner or its design team causes delay. If it's only limited to time extensions, you'll see that a lot in contracts. Ideally, you want to be able to chase after delay damages as well, but those are pretty significant clauses. And then escalation clauses. We mentioned earlier price escalation, certainly in the heels of COVID, very significant. But even now, you see a lot of contracts that'll have clauses that will indicate that if the price of materials goes up a predetermined amount, say more than 5%, then that increase gets passed on to the owner. Most owners, when you negotiate that kind of language up front, they'll agree that that's appropriate. They may want the inverse, so if costs go down, they get a savings. But when you have that discussion up front, and similar with all of these discussions regarding the type of contract, the scope, the means of delivery, the schedule, and the profit, to think about these things up front and have good faith discussions before things go off the rails and there's a dispute, that's going to save everyone time and money and angst. If the inevitable happens with some of these disputes and it goes to litigation, then so be it. But you want to make sure that you're building in the price of reviewing these contracts with counsel as part of the quote. We have plenty of clients that come to us after there's been a dispute and after things have gone bad, and they're forced to litigate, either go on offense to try and get paid, or they're on defense as they're getting sued. And oftentimes they remark that they didn't do the negotiation up front. They didn't involve counsel at the risk management stage when you're breaking down these contracts. And that's an expensive lesson. So take the time when you're quoting a job to incorporate in some contract review using counsel to make sure that the language is good for you, that it's appropriate for the given job, and that both parties are on the same page, you'll end up saving a lot of time and money in the long run. So thanks for joining us today. Again, we do the construction risks webinar the third Thursday of every month at 7:30. Please look at our LinkedIn profile on the firm's YouTube page and on the firm's website for more information. We also have a monthly employment law series and a business litigation series. You can join in, take a look, follow along on LinkedIn, and we give you a heads up in advance of what the topics are going to be. So thanks for joining us and thanks for watching. Thanks, Erling.
Thank you all.